growing up, my dad always said that the greatest individual accomplishment of the 20th century was Charles Lindbergh's 1927 flight from New York to Paris. This is that story. In 1919, a rich financier called Charles Ortiz wanted to promote breakthrough in the aviation industry. He put forward the princely sum of $25,000 for the first person or persons that could fly nonstop from New York to Paris or vice versa. Now at the time, in 1919, that was unheard of. That was something that was not possible. And for the first 5 years of the prize, no one even attempted it. And then after 5 years, people started to attempt the flight. Most of them went from Paris to New York. There were 4 notable flights, all crashed. 6 people died, several were injured. Maybe it was unattainable, not possible. Charles Lindbergh, in 1927, was 25 years old. He was an airmail pilot in the Midwest, and he had an idea that he could do it. Now, I often think about how we marvel at all these tech billionaires and how bold and brave they are. Charles Lindbergh was just a 25-year-old kid, and he thought that he could conquer the world and do this.
And he did.
He built a plane with the backing of some wealthy individuals who happened to be from St. Louis. That was his only connection. That's why he called it the Spirit of St. Louis. And that plane, I always marveled, did not have a front windscreen. I don't know if anybody's ever seen it. It didn't have a front windscreen. It's like driving down the road without a windshield. The only way he could see was through a periscope or to stick his head out. You can see it here. It had no front windscreen there. The reason why is he thought it would be safer in a crash because more of the weight was forward and he wouldn't be trapped in between.
How did he see?
I'll get to that.
Oh.
The plane also had a thick cloth cover. That's right, I said cloth. He flew a plane made out of fabric. Now, the prize did not require him to have a partner, but he intended to go solo for 2 reasons. Number 1, he was obsessed with weight. Every extra ounce that he could squeeze out of that plane, he was going to put into fuel, which is what would get him over there. Number 2, some of the efforts to claim this prize had failed because of disagreements of the partners, and he just didn't want to deal with that. Now, going solo created one big problem for him. That meant that he had to be awake the entire flight. Now, we don't think too much of being awake on a New York to Paris flight today because it maybe only takes 6 or 7 hours. But back then, it was 33 hours.
In the year?
33 hours from takeoff to landing.
Really?
And this was before the days of autopilot. That meant he had to be awake, he had to be alert, he had to fly the plane the whole time. There was no other option. If he fell asleep, it meant death. All of this also was before GPS and radar. So he he had to plot out his route on a map, and as he flew, he had to look out the window in what's called dead reckoning, correct his path based on that. Now, when he got to the ocean, he couldn't do that. He tried to gauge where he was in the ocean based on the number of icebergs that he saw. Another interesting thing about Lindbergh, and just to show you how stunning this was, he had never flown over open water. This was his first flight over open water, and he chose the Atlantic Ocean. Now, as I said, his biggest challenge was staying awake, so he removed the windows so that the air would flow through and keep him awake. And so as he was flying, at times he flew up to 10,000 feet. Obviously it was very cold, but he felt, and he was probably right, that that would keep him awake. And one of the bigger problems he had was staying awake, and this was probably his biggest mistake, was that 30 hours before he took off, he didn't sleep. He was so keyed up and so getting ready for preparing, he didn't sleep. So in the end, he was up 60 plus hours. And reading the book that I recently read, it's fascinating how he just, the whole flight, the middle of the flight, he was just fighting off sleeping. That's what it all was, just fighting off trying to stay awake. He made it to Paris in the early evening. Again, this is crazy to think about, but he had no map of Paris, and he only knew generally where the airport was. So there he is. He took off with not an exact idea where he was going. He found the Eiffel Tower, and he turned north because he knew it was north of the city. And there he is, 33 hours into the flight. He was just looking for a big, dark patch that might represent an airport. He found it. He had to fly over very low to confirm that's what it was. He landed, and he unexpectedly was greeted by 100,000 Parisians who came out to greet him. It was, I think, the greatest example of personal daring, risk-taking, and perseverance, and I agree with my dad. It was the greatest individual achievement